Part 3 of week 7 is about public goods and a little bit about merit goods. So the first example activity is give some real world examples of public goods. Just to remind ourselves that public goods are, in a sense, the opposite of private goods. A private good is defined as a good which you can be excluded from enjoying the benefits of it if you don't own it or don't have rights to it, and also that it diminishes as it is consumed. A public good, on the other hand, is a good which is non-excludable and non-diminishable, or also called non-rival. So this is a good where if it is supplied or comes into existence, no one can be excluded from enjoying the benefits of it. And also, as more people use an existing public good, that good doesn't diminish in quantity with use. So it's not merely something which is provided by the government. That's not what we mean by public good. Our definition of a public good is this technical definition of something which is non-excludable and non-diminishable. So let's look at some examples briefly. So we can think of public goods which are created. They have to be brought into existence by some kind of production process, so to speak. So we can think of national defence, for example. This is the classic example going back a couple of hundred years. So if you think of national defence, it's non-excludable. So for example, if a baby is born within the boundaries of Australia, then the baby is automatically enjoying the national defence of Australia. It can't be excluded from that, while ever it remains within the borders anyway. And it's also non-diminishable. So another baby is born, there's not less national defence than there was before. Of course, there is some defined quantity of national defence, but just because another baby is born or another person is within the borders, it doesn't mean that there is less national defence. The same is true in principle for the justice system. No one can be excluded from it as long as you fit the definitions of someone who would be brought within the justice system. And as there are more people, for example, within the society, there's not less of a justice system, so to speak. Streetlights is another classic example. So if there are streetlights in your street, then people can't be excluded from enjoying the benefits of the streetlights. Right? All you have to do is walk down the street and you enjoy the benefits of them. But they don't diminish as more people walk down the street. There's not less light available for others just because more people look at the streetlight, for example. And so on and so forth. For those other examples too. Traffic signs, same story. Free-to-air TV, non-excludable. Right? You just turn on the television and you gain access to free-to-air TV. And it doesn't diminish. The more people who watch free-to-air TV, it doesn't mean there's less free-to-air TV available to other people. And some information on the internet falls within the same category as this too, much like free-to-air TV. There are also a few naturally occurring public goods, such as sunlight, for example. So no one can be excluded from enjoying the benefits of sunlight, right? Assuming they haven't been locked up in a prison or something like that. And there's not less sunlight available just because more people go outside and go sunbaking. It doesn't diminish as more people use the sunlight. And of course, there's kind of in-between cases. So if we think of national parkland, for example, in some respects, this is a naturally occurring public good. People can't be excluded from enjoying the benefits of it, and the amount of parkland doesn't diminish as more people use the parkland. However, in a different sense, it is created in that it might be a legislated zoned area which is classified as national parkland, and there are rules and regulations over the conduct of the use of that parkland. So in that sense, it's something like a naturally occurring phenomenon, like sunlight, but in another respect, it's created in that there's legislation which guarantees its existence. We should also note that public goods can be transformed. So something that might start out as a public good can be turned into a common good. A common good is a good which is diminishable. As more people use it, it diminishes in quantity, but it's non-excludable. That is, as long as it comes into existence, everyone can get access to it. So if we think of a beach, for example, this could become a common good. It might start out a public good, but it might become a common good. Say, for example, Bondi Beach. As the population of Sydney increased and increased and increased, and more people went to Bondi Beach, in a sense, there was less beach space available for others. The amount of beach available to the next person who comes along will be less than the previous people who entered onto the beach. And similarly for clean air. Clean air, previously, if you go back to textbooks 50 years ago, clean air was classified as a public good. But today we might think of it as a common good. That is, no one can be excluded from enjoying the benefits of clean air if it exists. However, we do know that clean air is now used as a kind of a dumping ground, as a sink, so to speak. And it's so the amount of clean air does actually diminish now as more and more people and factories and cars use that clean air as a dump. So it becomes a common good, non-excludable but diminishable. Also, public goods can become quasi-public goods. So sporting fields, for example. Many moons ago, if you went back 100 years in Australia, sporting fields were regarded as public goods. No one could be prevented from enjoying the benefits of a sporting field. And they didn't really diminish. As more people used sporting fields, there wasn't less available for others because the population was relatively small. But over time, what has happened is that sporting fields have been privatised, so to speak. So what you find is that although there's a given number of sporting fields, they don't diminish as more people use the sporting fields. Nonetheless, you can be excluded from enjoying the benefits of them now. You have to pay tickets to get into sporting fields, for example. Pay TV is another example, where you get a transformation from free-to-air TV to pay TV. In the case of pay TV, this is a quasi-public good because as more people watch pay TV, there's not less available for others. However, you can be excluded from enjoying the benefits of it. And the same with the internet. So some news sites, for example, which were previously free public goods, that is, non-excludable, non-diminishable, they have set up paywalls so that although the number of people who look at a news website, as that increases, it doesn't decrease the amount of news available, so to speak, to look at, but you can be excluded from enjoying the benefits unless you pay a subscription fee. Why do free markets fail to supply the efficient, that is, the allocatively efficient, quantity of public goods? Well, the reason for that comes down to the non-excludability property of public goods. Because no one can be excluded if a public good comes into existence, since no one can be excluded from enjoying the benefits of the public good, people might think to themselves, well, I will simply free ride on the purchasing decisions of someone else. So rather than paying for it myself, I'll wait for some other idiot to pay for it, and then, because it's non-excludable, I will enjoy the benefits of that product which has been purchased by others. I'll free ride on their purchasing. Now, if this is an option, certainly there will be some percentage of people who will engage in free riding, who would have otherwise paid for the good if they could have been excluded from it. The only way to get access would be to pay for it. Right? But because they don't have to, they don't purchase the good, they don't express demand in the market for that product, and so the quote-unquote true demand for the product is not reflected in the marketplace. And for that reason, free markets for public goods usually severely under-allocate resources for their production. There is not the optimum allocation of resources. Less is allocated than would otherwise be the case, or less is allocated than would be the case if people expressed their demand for the product in some way through a market, for example. In the most extreme case, no resources would be allocated to the production of public goods because everyone would be attempting to free ride. Okay? So if you thought to yourself, well, rather than making a contribution to pay for national defence, I'll let other people pay for it, and then I will enjoy the benefits of the national defence simply by virtue of being within the borders of the country. Well, that's fine if only you think that, but what if everyone thinks that? In that case, who's paying for the national defence? Nobody. Everyone is waiting for some other idiot to pay for the national defence. So none gets purchased whatsoever. That's the most extreme case. Okay, what are some examples of merit goods? What do we mean by merit goods? Well, merit goods are not exactly the same as public goods. In principle, a merit good is a private good. That is, it's non-diminishable and excludable. It can be bought and sold in a market. However, for some reason or other, society deems it meritorious to consume these goods, even if some people would not voluntarily purchase those goods for some reason or other. So they might be irrational, for example, or they might be too poor, for example, to purchase a good, or they might just not like the good for some reason or other. But everyone else thinks you should be purchasing it. Okay? So what kind of goods could we have that are like that? Well, think of, for example, in Australia, education. So primary and high school education. In principle, education could be provided by the private sector. However, it's certainly the case that for some reason or other, some of the reasons I mentioned before, it can be all sorts of reasons. Some people won't purchase that education for their children, and their children will go without. Now, our society, has deemed that unacceptable, has deemed education to be a meritorious good that everyone should be consuming, irrespective of the particular personal weird preferences of any given parent. The government simply makes it mandatory that your children consume education. Similarly, for medical care, in Australia at least, it's deemed that some kind of basic level of medical care should be available and consumed by all people who are ill. Right? No one should be denied or should refuse medical care if they're ill. And so it becomes mandatory in that case. Vaccinations is another case, compulsory vaccinations. Some parents might say, no, I don't want to vaccinate my kids. The society as a whole says no, the vaccinations are sufficiently meritorious that everyone should be compelled to consume vaccinations. Poverty alleviation, similarly. Seatbelts is another good example. Some people don't like wearing seatbelts, but the society has deemed it a meritorious good. Everyone should be buying seatbelts, or they're just part of cars now. We even have laws which force you to use your seatbelts. And another example, which isn't often talked about, but is an important one perhaps, is artistic expression. So you might say, well, artistic expression, paintings and murals and sculptures and so on, could be deemed as private goods, certainly. But our society has deemed these artistic expression to be sufficiently meritorious that there should be some public provision and consumption of artistic expression. So you find statues and sculptures and paintings and so on and so forth in all sorts of places for the public to see. The way in which these goods are provided, there's no set method by which they're provided. They could be provided by charities, for example. They can be provided by private businesses, but they might also be provided by charities. They might be provided by private businesses who are subsidised by the government so that there's a sufficient amount of these goods. Or they might be provided directly by the government itself. Whatever the method, is not key to the definition of a merit good. What's key to its definition is that the society deems it meritorious to consume these goods, irrespective of people's personal preferences. But of course, the list that I've given here is not some kind of, universal list which is, created in time immemorial. What counts as a meritorious good varies from society to society, and is different in different historical periods, even within the one society. So, for example, why is it that in Australia, we have the subsidisation of some religious activities? So there's non-profit activities engaged in by religious institutions. They're not taxed. They're effective, and often they're given subsidies, such as religious charities. Also, there's religious private schools. They're heavily subsidised by the government as well. Why do these things exist? Well, it's because although these things are now quite debatable today, you'll see a lot of debate online about whether, say, there should be subsidisation of religious services and religious education and so on. In the past, it was deemed by the society to be meritorious that, for example, children receive religious instruction. And so the government provided substantial subsidies for the provision of religious education for children. Another one might be dental care. So in the past, we have not regarded dental care as a meritorious good that should be consumed by all people. But obviously that's a debatable thing today. There are many people today who argue that dental care falls under the ambit of medical care, and so it should similarly be regarded as a meritorious good and should be subsidised by the government in much the same way as going to the doctor or going to the hospital. It should be covered by Medicare. But currently that's not the case. It's not currently classified as a meritorious good, but it certainly could be.